He's still dangerous, rubbish. Think of him as a glorified entertainment officer on board a cruise liner filled with mental retardees. He steals from a cabin here, sets fire to curtains there, lets off a stink bomb in the dining room, and suddenly the patients wake up. They start taking an interest in the voyage and the next port of call. Dear Charles, Paula took my hand and drew me towards the mirror, speaking to my reflection as if more comfortable in this reversed world. You're obsessed with him, all that boyish charm, the fresh-faced young army officer rousing the shiftless natives. What's wrong with that? It sounds a pretty fair description. You've only seen the early stages, those stink bombs and apple pie beds. How does he keep everything going once he's left the Residencia? He'll move down the coast, to Calahonda and the other pueblos. Will he? I felt a curious pang at the thought of Crawford leaving. There's a lot to do still. He'll be here for a while. Everyone needs him. Boyish charm and enthusiasm are pretty thin on the ground these days. I've watched him at work, Paula. He genuinely wants to help everyone. He's stumbled on this strange way of getting people to make the most of themselves. It's touching to see such simple faith. He's really some kind of saint. He's a psychotic. Not fair. He gets carried away sometimes, but there's no viciousness in the man. Pure psycho. She turned her back on the mirror and stared critically at me. You can't see it. No, all right. Perhaps there's a faint strain of something odd. He had a lousy childhood. I sympathize with him there. He's the saint as psychopath, or the psychopath as saint. Whichever way, he's doing good. And when this saintly figure moves on, what then? You'll find another beach redeemer? We won't need to. Crawford's unique. If and when he goes, everything will keep on running. Will it? How? The formula works. He stumbled on the first and last truth about the leisure society and perhaps all societies. Crime and creativity go together and always have. The greater the sense of crime, the greater the civic awareness and richer the civilization. Nothing else binds a community together. It's a strange paradox. But Charles, Paula stopped me as I lifted the suitcases from the bed. When he leaves, what will happen? What holds everything together? I knew that Paula was trying to lead me on, guiding me through an equation that I had refused to solve. Self-interest, I hope. Estrella Domar seems to be doing all right. Actually, I have a few more patients and insomnia. By the way, has he started a film club? That's an odd question. I hesitated, aware that we were both looking down at the bed. As a matter of fact, he has. He's put me in charge. How did you guess? It wasn't a guess. This is the moment for Bobby Crawford to start a film club. A film club? I repeated Paula's almost too clever question as I drove back to the Residencia. But Crawford's argument still convinced me. There came a point when the waking sleeper stepped from his bed and stared at himself in the mirror, and a film club provided the role. Nonetheless, the example of Paula's pornographic movie was a warning. When I recruited my members, I would make sure that they were genuine enthusiasts of the lens, eager to add to the growing self-awareness of a community. Crawford's porno films were too divisive. What had begun as a mischievous bedroom romp had turned into a sordid exploitation of a few distressed women, Paula among them. I missed her now, but she was still picking the scab of her hostility to Crawford. His energy and optimism, his open-eyed seizing of the day, irritated her in some way. As I drove through the gates of the Residencia, I was already thinking of the first film I would supervise, perhaps even script and direct. Ideas had begun to stir, prompted by the white geometry of the Costa Sol complex. I visualized a last year at Marienbad for the 1990s, a study of the waking of a community by a mysterious intruder with a hint of Pasolini's theorem. Eager to settle into the villa, to test the water in the pool and return the serves of the tennis machine, I accelerated round the last bend and almost struck a slim, silver-haired man standing outside my gates. Braking hard, I slewed the car across the road and came to a jolting halt a few inches from the massive trunk of the eucalyptus tree that presided over the drive. Dr. Sanger, I nearly hit you. I switched off the engine and tried to steady my hands. Doctor, you look exhausted. Are you all right? I think so. Mr. Prentice? I'm sorry. He leaned against the offside wing and then stepped away from the car, one hand reaching out to the sunlight. He was clearly distracted by more than one anxiety, and I assumed that he had lost his glasses or a set of keys. He glanced up and down the road and then peered into the rear seat of the Citroen, his lips moving as he silently mouthed the name. Can I help you? Anxious for him, I stepped from the car. Dr. Sanger? I'm looking for one of my patients. She may have lost herself. Did you see anyone as you drove here? A young woman? No. You didn't see her? Sanger stared at my face, unsure whether to confide in me. Slim, with very short hair and a gold ring in her lip, wearing a man's dressing gown? Lori Fox. She was staying with me during her treatment. I feel responsible for her. Of course. I searched the empty avenue. I'm afraid I haven't seen her. I'm sure she'll come back. Perhaps. She was sitting by the pool as I prepared lunch. Then she was gone. Your friend Mr. Crawford was here at your house. I see we're now to be neighbors. Sanger gazed at the villa, his face as blanched as his silver hair. Crawford may have given her a lift. I smiled as reassuringly as I could at this troubled man, realizing for the first time the emotional appeal to women of a vulnerable psychiatrist. A lift? Yes, I think he might. I assume so. If you see Crawford, if he telephones you, ask him to return her. I promised her father that I would help her. It's important that she take the medication I prescribed. Sanger massaged his cheeks with one hand, trying to force the blood back into his face. Crawford has so many notions of his own. For him, a young woman should be free to be unhappy? Exactly, but for Lori Fox, unhappiness is not a therapeutic option. I find it difficult to talk to Crawford. I'd guessed that he dislikes psychiatrists. We've let him down. He needed our help. Mr. Prentice, he still does. Murmuring to himself, Sanger turned away from me, slowly clapping his hands at the silent trees. He was still wandering up and down the road as I carried my suitcases past the sparkling pool. As Elizabeth Shand had promised, a first consignment of furniture had been delivered, a black leather sofa and an elegant Ernst chair, a giant television set and a double bed, mattress and linen. But the villa was still pleasingly empty, and the rooms were the white spaces of opportunity. I had relished on my first visit. After leaving my suitcases in the bedroom, I strolled around the upper floor and strayed briefly into the maid's room. From the window, I watched Sanger standing on his hill and gazing bleakly at the silent swimming pool, the night dress in his hands. No longer reflected by the calm water, the light in the compound had grown dimmer, as if its soul had slipped away across the rooftops. The window was open, and the ash of a loosely wrapped cigarette lay on the sill. I could imagine Crawford signaling to Lori Fox, letting the scent of cannabis drift towards this young woman entombed in her doses of Largatil. But I was no longer interested in the gloomy psychiatrist and his youthful lover. I assumed that Crawford was with her, speeding in the Porsche to one of his safe houses on the northern perimeter road, to the kind of camaraderie provided by Reza Livingston. I unpacked and showered, then helped myself to the tapas in the refrigerator and the Keswick sisters' courtesy bottle of champagne. Sitting on the terrace beside the pool, I looked through the selection of cards pushed through the letter slot. There were advertisements for taxi services and yacht brokers, estate agents, and investment advisors. One card, so freshly printed that its ink was damp, puffed a local mother and daughter massage service. Dawn and Daphne for a new sensation in massage. Deep, intimate, discreet, will visit 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. So the netherworld of the Residencia Costa Sol was stepping out into the sun. A mobile phone lay on the table beside me, another useful gift from Betty Shand. I guess that Crawford had left the massage service card knowing that I would be intrigued. Commercial sex demanded special skills from the client as much as from the provider. Self-styled mother and daughter teams always made me uneasy, especially in Taipei or Seoul, where too many were real mothers and daughters. However pleasant, with mother pacing the overeager daughter, I often felt that I was the intermediary in an act of incest. I pushed away the mobile phone, then raised it and dialed the number. A woman's recorded voice with a soft Lancashire accent informed me that there were vacancies that evening and invited me to leave my telephone number. As I knew, Bobby Crawford made all things possible, assuaged all guilts, and drew back the bedspread that lay over our lives and dreams. 25, Carnival Day. The Residencia Costa Sol was celebrating itself, saluting its happy return to life. From the balcony of my office on the first floor of the sports club, I watched the line of carnival floats across the plaza, bedecked with flowers and bunting, cheered on by an exuberant crowd whose voices almost drowned the selections from Gilbert and Sullivan, relayed from the loudspeakers along the route. A cloud of petals and confetti hung in the air over the revelers' heads, borne aloft by the lungs of the tourists drawn into the Residencia from Estrella de Mar and the resorts along the coast. For 3 days, all thoughts of security had been abandoned. Intrigued by the first firework displays, the visitors had parked their cars along the beach and soon overwhelmed the guards at the gatehouse. Martin Lindsay, the retired lifeguards colonel who was the elected mayor of the Residencia Costa Sol, swiftly consulted his fellow counselors and ordered the security system to shut down its computers for the duration of the festival. The Costa Sol Arts Fair, scheduled to last a single afternoon, was now on its second day and showed every sign of outrunning another night. Towed by Lindsay's Range Rover, a float passed the sports club and began its circuit of the plaza. A black silk banner bearing the legend, "The Residencia Philharmonic Players," wafted above the dozen members of the orchestra, who sat at their music stands, bows working across their violins and cellos, while the pianist strummed the keyboard of a white baby grand, and a graceful harpist in an ivory evening gown plucked the strings of a harp decked with yellow roses. The medley of Vivaldi and Mozart struggled gamely with the cheers of the tourists raising their glasses outside the crowded cafes of the shopping mall. Two handsome women members, still in their tennis whites, stepped from my office onto the balcony and gripped the rail, waving their rackets in another float that passed below us. Good God, is that Fiona Taylor? How wonderful, she's completely starkers. Designed by the Costa Sol Arts Club, the float carried a mock-up of an artist's studio. 6 easels stood at one end of the tableau, artists in Victorian smocks sketching away with their charcoal and crayons. A sculptor, Teddy Taylor, an ear, nose, and throat specialist from Purley, worked at his clay table, fashioning a model of his decorous blonde wife. Dressed in a flesh-colored skin suit, she posed like Lady Godiva on a stuffed studio horse, smiling broadly at the tourists who wolf-whistled at her. "Bobby Crawford, he's arrived," one of the tennis ladies began to shriek, almost knocking my vodka and tonic from the rail. "Come on, Bobby, let's see you pose." A newsreel location van of a Spanish TV channel kept pace with the arts float, its cameraman filming the glamorous sitter in close-up. Bobby Crawford stood behind the cameraman, steadying his arm as the convoy of vehicles turned around the plaza. Rose petals covered his blonde hair and black batik shirt, and silver confetti spotted his sweating face and forehead, but he was too happy to brush them away. Grinning broadly, he waved to the tourists, toasting them with a glass of wine handed to him by a passing spectator. When the location van brushed against the float, he leapt aboard, almost falling across the easels, picked himself up and embraced the beaming Fiona Taylor. "Take it off, Bobby, you handsome sod." "Off, off, off. Charles, order him to strip." The women beside me bounded like cheerleaders on their tennis pumps, rackets whirling above my head, and Crawford good-naturedly unbuttoned his shirt and exposed his hairless chest, striking a Byronic pose for the sculptor. A news agency photographer ran beside the float, and Crawford peeled off his shirt and hurled it to the crowd. When they reached the shopping mall, he leaped from the float and ran bare-chested past the cafe tables, pursued by a squealing posse of teenage girls in carnival hats. Exhausted by the noise and relentless good humor, I left the tennis ladies and took refuge in my office. Yet another tableau had reached the plaza, an amateurish effort by the old-time dancing club, but the elderly couples trying to waltz on the swaying platform received a big cheer as Lady Godiva. The Residencia Costa Sol was happy with itself, and for good reason. During the past 2 months, the legal documents from Senor Danvilla on my desk reminded me that Frank's trial began the next day. The explosion of civic activity had astonished even Bobby Crawford. At dinner with Elizabeth Shand the previous evening, he had laughed and shaken his head over what I termed a fast-forward renaissance, all too embarrassed by the genie that had sprung from the bottle. The somnolent township with its empty shopping mall and deserted sports club had transformed itself into another Estrella de Mar, as if an infectious but benevolent virus had floated along the coast, invading the sluggish nervous system of the Residencia and galvanizing it into life. An intact and self-sufficient community had sprung into being. 6 new restaurants thrived around the plaza, all but one financed by Betty Shand and managed by the Keswick sisters. 2 nightclubs had opened near the marina, the Milroy for the older set and Bliss's for the younger. The town council met weekly at the Anglican church, whose Sunday congregations packed its pews. Meanwhile, the volunteer security patrols kept the Suncoast riffraff from any access to the complex. A host of societies pursued every pastime from origami to hydrotherapy, the tango to tai chi, and all this, whatever my doubts, seemed to have been conjured into existence by the dedication of one man. "Bobby, you're a new kind of messiah," I often told him. "The Imam of the marina, the Zoroaster of the beach umbrella." "No, Charles, I'm a facilitator." I'm still not sure that it isn't a huge coincidence, but I take off my hat to you. Put it back on. They did it, not me. I was just the donkey engine. With his unfeigned modesty, Crawford was quick to pass any credit to the people of the Residencia. As I had learned for myself, an immense reservoir of unused talent had lain dormant beneath the shaded awnings. The middle-class professionals who had dozed by their swimming pools were sometime lawyers and musicians, advertising and television executives, management consultants, and local government officers. The skills base of the Residencia Costa Sol might not equal that of the Medici's Florence, but it was far wider than most comparable towns in Europe or North America. Even I had been touched by this infection of optimism and creativity. Resting by the pool in the evenings, I had sketched the outline of a book. Marco Polo, the world's first tourist? That would be a history of tourism and its eclipse of the age of travel. After despairing of me for so many months, my London agent was now bombarding me with faxes urging me to provide him with a detailed synopsis. I frequently played bridge with Betty Shand and the Hennessy's, reluctant though I was to leave the Residencia for Estrella de Mar and its baleful memories of the Hollinger fire, and had even been tempted to play a small part in a forthcoming production of Orton's What the Butler Saw.